these and the other painting, it's the same name, right? It's the same person, right? But the style is completely different. Now, if you really look at all of it, no picture, come to back. Okay.
Taking video.
The area of these museum focus a lot on the painting that reflecting the war. Now, in the American side, they call the Vietnam War, and from our side, we call that the war to fight against the American. A lot of the artists, also the soldier, and during the war, they work reflecting the theme and the issue and anything related to the war. For example, the most very, very important kind of painting here is the artist use work as a propaganda. You know what propaganda means? Propaganda is the way to, exactly, to kind of advertising, to kind of sort of fighting. This is one perfect example. Question? Okay, and then there's also another subject here. We see a lot of painting reflecting the relationship between the soldier and the people. And since it's during the wartime, a lot of paintings, majority of them are made out of paper. Some of them actually coming out more of the sketches. I know a lot of artists who are the artists during the war. So when after 1975, when the war ends, they continue to work on the theme of the war for so many years later, because that is the world that they know. That's the memory. That is their youth. So it still actually continue with a lot of older generation who continue to use that as a subject matter of their own art. I would probably not say that all of the work are high artistic value, but it actually marks a very important timeline of the history of Vietnam. Question? No question? Okay. We're running out of time, so what I want you to do is you're going to go to the left and then make a comparison. Bức tranh này sẽ nằm trong bài final. Ok, 40 sao, 40 sao, 40 sao. Nào các bạn ơi, đề nghị các bạn lùi một tí cho cái tranh nó thở một tí. Xong rồi đến khi tí nữa chúng mình còn muốn xem kỹ, chúng mình xem sau. Okay, sit down. Okay. Sit down xong thì cuối cùng coi như là một lúc sau là
There's no place to sit.
Alright, what is the difference between
Keep silent, little bit.
Okay, I promise 2 more painting and we're gonna go home. Yeah! They're just too tired. They've been waking up from 6 o'clock. Okay, what is the difference between these painting and Nguyễn Gia Trí painting? They both like a painting.
First of all, the colors.
Okay, very good. Very different in terms of what kind of color tones here? Cool tone color. And Nguyễn Gia Trí painting is more warm tone. Right. Okay. Another thing is, how about the style? Which one is more realistic? This one. It looks almost like photograph, right? The other one is more decorative, right? Okay. I really like to make this comparison a lot because they both lacquer. When you think about lacquer in the old day, people often think that lacquer is the kind of medium to represent something very decorative, right? Do you know what does it mean, decorative? Yeah. Decorative, it means something more like 2-dimension and flat, and it's like with detail, and it's actually appear a lot in the old tradition of painting and drawing. But these paintings prove the point that lacquer can also represent something with 3-dimensional space. When you look at Nguyễn Gia Trí, you see everything is more like layers, flat, right? But when you see this, it actually gives you this, the perspective of something beyond 2 dimensions. It's more 3D. Like somebody just said, it's more realistic. It looks more photograph-like, right? It creates the feel that you can actually walk in. Now the second thing about color, the color, it's cool tones color. And Nguyễn Gia Trí is more warm tone. Now, another thing which is very different also is that between those two. Now, okay, so you can see another thing which is very important about these paintings is the contrast. If you sit way over there next to Richard, you can also see the contrast already there. What kind of contrast do you see here?
Dark and light.
Light and dark, right? If you squint your eyes like this, you will see that, oh, something very light and something very dark. And then there are other kind of contrast. What is another contrast beside the light?
Scale.
The scale of the mountain is really big, right? You feel the nature is really big and people so small. Now, one thing is also I found that is very different between these painting and Nguyễn Gia Trí landscape. Is Nguyễn Gia Trí landscape is you see everything immediately, right? But with these painting, if you sit over there, you won't see it. But later, when you come very close, you will see their houses. But you won't see the houses. This kind of painting is the painting that the more you look, the more you see, right? So it's very much more hidden compared to the other painting. Now, the color here is much more simple, but if you really look very closely, it's in green-blue color, but the color have multiple tones. Do you know what is the difference between color and tone?
Tony.
Color, it means red, yellow, blue, white, that's different color. Now tone, it means it's one color, but it's lighter or darker. For example, this is one tone of red, this is another tone of red, and the other one is a little more pink, this one is even lighter. So within one range of color, you see they're light and dark. So that is actually exactly his painting. He used very limited palette of color. But when you come closer, you see so many different types of green and blue was reflected in it. Even with the gold color that reflecting the light, you see the area of gold in the front and the area of gold in the back. It's quite different, right? It's a little bit fade away in the back, and when you look at the sky, it's even a little bit more yellow. So just one color, but the way he used it, it makes you feel that it has so many colors, but actually it's just one. So, yeah, so that's just making a little bit of the differences. Question? Don't tell me that it's an oil painting. You get 0 for that. No, I heard that many times. I said, no, it's a lacquer painting. No. Question? You want to lie down?
How about the painting? Lacquer, how about the painting?
Ah, okay, very good question. The other painting that Nguyễn Gia Trí used apply a lot of different techniques, like the technique of drawing, the technique of carving, the technique of eggshell. Do you see eggshell in here? No. Do you see carving in here? No. Here the artist actually using lacquer, but the technique of painting is very similar to oil painting. So that's why the outcome become very realistic, using regular brushes. I really love this painting so much. The 1955.
Is it Vietnamese?
Of course it's Vietnamese.
Where is that?
The east-west, yes, Tây Bắc, east-west.
Bắc.
Yeah, and also one of the things I mentioned about using the war as a theme, this is one of them. A lot of artists, they use the war theme in their work as one of the subjects. Some people, all their life painting war theme. That's their subject. Question?
What about the material?
Material being
Green
and blue color. Okay, very good question too. You know that in the past, artists really use the natural material, right? They use a lot of different kind of material like red pigment, the eggshell, gold, and silver. Eventually, lacquer continued to develop, so many people started to use more of the industrialized color or like new color. So you started to see now lacquer has more color, more green and purple and you know, other form of cold tones color. Do you think that's a good thing? Yes? Yes, no? Do you think the fact that lacquer has more palette of color is a good thing?
In the last video, you say the artists don't use blue and green in
traditional.
So
In tradition,
Yeah.
yeah, in the traditional painting. Yeah, they don't use it, but now everybody uses it. If you want to go to tradition and only use a limited earth and tone, you're welcome to do that. I think that compared to oil painting, fresco painting, watercolor sketches, lacquer painting is very young. It's actually very young if you really think about it. It only started to develop since the early 20th century, right? Lacquer history has been developing through many centuries, but lacquer painting in Vietnam basically is only over 1 century. So it's actually not really, it's not very, very mature and it's still developing. So I think that the fact that the artists find more color and more material for it, it's a way to progress. Like I used to have these kind of argument with my teacher. One of my teachers at school was saying that, no, you have to use traditional lacquer. It has to be with earthen tone. It has to be this way. And then other people say, no, I prefer to use more other color. The painting are more interesting. That's kind of like a no-ending discussion because I think artists have the right to choose what is better for their works. I think so. So, you know, for me, I think it's better. For traditional artists, no, it's a betray. It's a cheating.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the same way. You go to school by bicycle or you go by cars. You get to school anyway. That's the final purpose. But it depends on what kind of perspective that you look from. If you look from a traditional perspective, then of course it's difficult to accept anything.
It's, I see it look like a photograph.
Yes.
So can you compare about to this picture to the readers when they take a photo? I think
No, this is Phan Kế An.
and see the raw based on the certain.
There was no photograph. Artists work from sketches. Drawing.
So this is real mountain that we see.
Okay, do you think that artists really bring the lacquer painting out of the field and draw it? Majority of people paint from their sketches, just like Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes.
The Last Supper is from sketches. They did hundreds of drawing before it make into painting. Yeah. But now, of course, you have a photograph, so that's great. Alright, two more paintings, you guys.
Come on, you can come too.
Okay, we're gonna go very quickly. It's gonna be one of the questions in the midterm. 3 star. 3 star. Okay, 3 star. We got. All right. Okay, so we go on the 3rd floor.
Sorry, I mean, listen to.
Sit down.
Okay, all the area on the top here focus on 3 kinds of painting: oil painting, silk painting over there, and wood carving. We're going to focus a little bit on the area of oil painting, and I really want to focus on this particular painting and the artist. Some of you have heard about Bùi Xuân Phái, and what do you heard about him?
Thiếu nữ bên Hoa
Oh,
Huệ.
street.
She's going about
She's my friend.
Really?
Old quarter. Okay, Bùi Xuân Phái was one of the Hanoian artists whose work focused a lot on the old Hanoi in the late 70s and early 80s. This is not the kind of Hanoi now. You don't see this Hanoi anymore.
Yes.
Now, one of the things very interesting about this his painting is that if you look at his painting, you feel there's some kind of romance, some kind of very romantic.
Yes.
You know, it's more like history rather than contemporary. It's something nostalgic. Do you know what is nostalgic? Nostalgic is the term to indicate that something was really nice in the past and now it's no longer there. And you too close to the painting. Move. Gần quá bức tranh. Okay, when you think about an old memory that is so good and you're missing that memory, so his painting is sort of like that kind of nostalgic feeling of the old quarter of Hanoi. Now, one of the things you notice mostly from Bùi Xuân Phai's painting of the old quarter is you don't see people. Or if you do see people, then people played a very minor role. Sometimes, like, it's very different from M. Thuy. We're making a comparison here. What is the main subject in M. Thuy's painting? The character, right? But in Bùi Xuân Phai's painting, the main character is the street, is the landscape. So you see that here it has the role that is reversed. The people become the landscape and the landscape become people. The landscape become the subject matter, the main focus, and the people are no longer as a character. When you look at M3, you see the emotion, you see that it's the girl, you see the flesh and bone, you see the emotional expression on the face. Now when you see with landscape by Busan Fai, all the character is the thing that express the emotion, not the person. The person only just like a tree, additional element in this painting. Now look at the color that he was using. What kind of color tones here?
Dark.
Very gray color, right?
Gray.
You see that the color is not very strong. You don't see a very vivid color. The color are mostly gray, dark. Also, there's kind of a light tones here, but the color are quite simple. And the border, do you know what is the border? The contour, the line is very strong. You see all the line that border contour of the house is very strong in black. Now, how does he use the paint? What kind of paint he uses?
Is it very
Thick,
Yes.
right? Actually, from my observation, I think that besides using the brush, he probably used the knife as well, the palette knife, as the way to create these kind of texture. So you see that compared to M. Thuy, the paint is very thin, but for Busan Phai's painting, the way he actually used the texture is actually very thick. And actually, if you look at some of the traditional, well, not really traditional, but the painting from Europe in the first half of the 20th century, the development of using really bold, thick brushstroke was actually very popular in many of them.
Is this another example of Impressionism?
I would not call this as an impressionist style because it doesn't really use the natural effect of lighting.
Okay.
Yeah, not like M. Thuy. M. Thuy is much more realistic.
I was just wondering because he doesn't worry
This
about
one-
the detail of the
Yes,
sky or anything.
exactly. This one, I think, is a little closer to post-impressionism.
Post-impressionism.
Post-impressionism that go a little bit with Fauvism. I would mention a little bit more with that after TED when we actually study about style. Yeah, it's the form of style that is actually post-impressionism. Now look at the painting, which year it was dated, 1984. Just a little bit about Busan Phai's life. He actually has a really difficult life. The time of the history that he was born, the time that he was developed as an artist, he had only one exhibition in his life. That was the first exhibition, and it was also the last exhibition. At that time in Vietnam, there was two forms of art representation. One is art for art's sake, and one is art for serving the humanity, or in a way that art was being used as a propaganda for the political perspective. And Busan Phai is one of the representation that art is basically for art's sake. It's for aesthetic beauty, observation, and that also create a lot of difficulty at his lifetime. At that time, it happened also with literature and everything else as well. Another story. When he was living, he was very poor. And a lot of time he goes to Mr. Lum, do you know Cafe Lum, for drinking coffee and tea. And he always leave the painting there. And when he died, Lum, actually the owner, inherited a really big collection of Busan Phai's painting. And now all of these paintings become like a huge collection that's like $1 million painting. If you ever got a chance to go to Ho Chi Minh City, there is a great Busan Phai museum by Chen Hậu Tuấn. He collects mostly a large percentage of Busan Phai's painting. After,
Are any of his paintings still in Cafe Lum?
yes,
Yeah?
yes. After the 80s, in the 90s, a lot of Vietnamese artists imitate Busan Phai's style and copy his painting because it's very easy to sell. That people really love this style, and a lot of people, like tourists, they're really interested in that. So there are many artists and many generations later still copy the style and imitate this painting for the business purpose. Question?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I see that the surface of this painting is smooth. Why the other painting is so smooth?
Smooth.
Very good question. When you do oil painting, the kind of surface that you're painting on is cloth. And the kind of cloth, it's called canvas. Canvas is C-A-N-V-A-S. In Vietnamese translation, it's called toan. Toan. Okay, there are many kinds of toan. Okay, when you, it's like your clothes. Some kind of tuan is very smooth, and some kind is very texture. It's the same thing like when you go and buy fabric in the market. Some kind of fabric are very smooth like silk, and some fabric it's very rough like this. And when you paint on the very thick kind of canvas, the texture of the canvas really show. This is a different kind of texture because it's different canvas, that's all. Some artists have even worked with wood, so then the surface is completely smooth. So it's just that, it's just a technical issue. All right, good. You guys look sleepy. Let's go to one more painting and then we go home with Mama. Oh my God, this is the longest tour I ever gave us. Giờ ngay máy ảnh lên, CNN bắt đầu. Okay, what is the difference between Đông Hồ and Hàng Chống painting? Printing. What is the difference?
The difference between
Đông Hồ and Hàng Chống. This is the two style. Hàng Chống and Đông Hồ. What is the difference between these
Object.
two styles?
I
Object.
think Hangzhou painting for worship, ancestor worship, and Dongho painting.
Okay, it's the answer is actually very simple. Hàng Chống painting is because it's from Hàng Chống, and Đông Ho painting because it's from Đông Ho. That's very simple, right? It's trick question. Somebody said because of the material, right? Yes and no. No, because they both use the same material. They both use the rice paper, mulberry paper, gió paper, dùng giấy gió. Now, on this side, you know, these two large painting is a typical of the Hàng Chống painting. Hàng Chống painting originally is the kind of painting coming from Hàng Chống that you see. What kind of style is it? It's a little Chinese, right? It's very much like Chinese style of drawing. The second thing that is also very special is that it's really bigger scale than Đông Ho, right? The artist normally prints the contour line first, and then they use the color and draw the color, so that all the painting looks slightly different from one to another. The composition is exactly the same, but the color is slightly changing from one to another. Nowadays, unfortunately, Hàng Chống painting is limited, it's narrowed down, and there's only one last person who's still doing this form of drawing. That is artisan Lady Nguyen. Lady Nguyen is the only one right now that still continue to draw this form of painting. So hopefully he's still doing that and teaching for his son, because otherwise if he's gone, then that's it, no more. Now, it's very sad that Vietnamese traditional painting and handicrafts are a lot of time dying because there's no economical way to really feed it to grow. Now, compared to Hàng Chống painting, Đông Ho is a little bit different. Đông Ho is a more form of the folk art. You see, first of all, the scale is much smaller, and it's not the form of painting, but it's more like a print. Here, print first and color. And here there are many different layers of print. So for example, if you look at these prints, this is about how many colors you see here is that number of how many wood block. Each wood block is one color. So they always start with the base first, and the last color is the line. The contour line is the last wood block. Now, what kind of subject matter? You see that Hàng Chống drawing, Hàng Chống printing is a lot more sophisticated in detail, somewhat a little more Chinese influences. Now, Đông Ho is more like Vietnamese folk art. The subject matter in Hàng Chống painting, some of you just say about worship. It's actually right. A lot of Hàng Chống painting was used for ceremonial, for worshiping, for prayer. For Đông Ho, it's a little bit different. The Đông Ho art is normally being used to hang in the house, especially in the new year, to wish for good luck. Some of the painting over there with the chicken and then the pig is form of like prosperity, development. Some of them actually developed from the folk story. I really like Dongho painting because sometimes I feel there's something very much mundane to the daily life. Like this particular one is the wedding. You see, this is the mouse wedding, and then you see the mouse going through the line, and then on the top there's the cat. So of course the cat's gonna eat the mouse, and in order to go through, you have to be corrupted. It's the corruption. Yeah, it's like you have to be corrupted. Corruption. You have to give the cat some bird and the fish, so then the cat don't eat them. So it's the deep meaning through it is how you behave in the society. When you actually encounter somebody who's more powerful than you and can eat you up, then instead of fighting them, you have to behave in a certain way for your own benefit. So it's also a very sophisticated meaning. It's within something very simple. Now on the top one, it's the class of all the toad. This is all different toad, the big, the small. You see the one who's being hit in the bum because he's bad. It looks very chaotic class. We don't want to be like that, right? And then there are also later there's development of newer version of Dongho where it was using different kinds of national hero like Ma Chung. And into all of these prints. I remember I took a group of American tourists to Dongho to see, and they have a very interesting version of Dongho printing with catching the American pilot, like fighting the American. Tôi nhớ là dần có một đoàn du lịch Mỹ đi vào còn có bản in là đánh chết thằng Mỹ cơ. Có một bạn có cái bản đấy đấy, có hẳn tranh Dongho thời kỳ chống Mỹ rất là hay. Very interesting. Okay, and then ở đây có bao nhiêu người biết tranh tính ghen không ạ? Yeah, the jealousy. Okay, jealousy is over there. You see here, jealousy is over here. This is the image. This is the image of the husband. You know, in the old day, the husband can get married to multiple wives. This is the first wife, and this is the second wife. The second wife is younger, prettier, and naked. And then the first wife is more powerful. So then, of course, the husband is always like protect. Who's somebody who's younger and prettier, and this is the second wife. So then the first one was like raising the scissor and said,
Is that a knife?
that's the scissor, and said, I'm gonna cut your hair, because cutting the hair in the old days is a great way to insult. When you shave somebody's head, it's a punishment. So then this wife was kind of like throwing the hair and said, here's the hair, do you dare to cut? Because of course the husband is protecting her. So it's kind of reflecting a very great sense of humor of the local miniscope of the family in the feudalism.
But it's cultural.
It's the culture too, so it's quite interesting. Okay, one more painting here, guys. One more. One last one. Okay, this one is the Hang Chong painting, but it's a very old painting. Why do you see the line here?
Wood block?
Yeah, because of the wood is really old, so then the crack was getting bigger and bigger. So when the artist printed, it has this line in the middle.
So that painting is all just one wood block?
Yeah, it's one wood block. And then this is a reflection of all the market. Đây là chợ ạ. Trong cái khu chợ này thì có cả miền xuôi, miền ngược, có đủ mọi thành phần trong xã hội. Có cả kẻ ăn xin và có thằng đang móc túi này. Đấy, mọi người nhìn thấy có thằng đang móc túi không ạ? Đấy, tức là người ta quan niệm là trong xã hội thì phải có đủ loại người. Có một cái rất hay là trong phiên chợ này nó bao gồm tất cả các loại hình văn hóa ở đây, bao gồm cả miền núi lẫn miền xuôi nằm hết ở đây ạ. Đây là một cái khu rất là... Mọi người về sau có thể quay lại đây xem ạ. Ok, we're gonna finish here. Chúng ta dừng lại ở đây. Mọi người có câu hỏi gì thì hỏi, còn nếu không thì đã đi xuống nhà, đứng trước cửa chụp với nhau một cái ảnh, xong chúng ta đi về. Mừng vì gì? Mừng vì xong rồi.
Đúng rồi, chưa.